welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant. Today I'll be talking about WrestleMania 15 as seen on the WWE Network. Not one of the better WrestleManias, considering it was in the midst of the Attitude Era, right at the pinnacle of the Attitude Era. Was not really that good of a WrestleMania. I didn't really enjoy WrestleMania 16 either, so as great as the Attitude Era was, some of the best WrestleManias did not take place during this time period, which I thought was pretty interesting. But going through the full card here, kicking it off a hardcore championship matchup, triple threat contest between the defending champion Billy Gunn, Al Snow, and Hardcore Holly. This was right around the time that the hardcore title was first instituted in the WWE. I think this was before the 24/7 rule was put in place. So it was just all about hardcore matches. And they went outside, and they went in the freezing cold water and everything else, and Hardcore Holly ultimately came out victorious. It was a fun match for what it was. Like I've talked about before, I'm not a huge fan of hardcore wrestling, but when it involves like tons and tons of blood and shit like that, like when it's unnecessarily brutal and just gross to watch, this wasn't like that at all. It was your typical WWE hardcore style brawl, going outside, all over the arena. It was fun for what it was. Hardcore Holly coming out victorious as the new hardcore champion. So I don't know if it was the ideal way to kick off the show with a hardcore title match for a match that went only 7 minutes. It wasn't the best match, and I probably would have gone with something else to kick off the show, but it was fun for what it was. And I was always a huge fan of the hardcore title. That's why I loved watching these WrestleManias, from this WrestleMania from 98, WrestleMania 15, or 99, I'm sorry, WrestleMania 15 to WrestleMania 18. I think they were still doing the hardcore title by that point. So I loved all those WrestleManias because I loved the 24/7 rule, and especially Crash Holly, who was always awesome. So yeah, a nice way to kick off the show. Could have been better, but fun for what it was. Tag team titles on the line in this next contest. Owen Hart and Jeff Jarrett taking on the tandem of D'Lo Brown and Test. So kind of a random duo. I think they were, I don't know why they were together. D'Lo Brown and Test. It seems really random. I watched these WrestleManias like a week or two ago, and my memory when it comes to like shit from a week ago is really bad. I mean, it kind of goes to show I don't really remember much about this matchup. I mean, if it was any good, if like it was really good, then I would remember more about it. But I just can't. I mean, it was a decent match. But Owen Hart and Jeff Jarrett came out victorious. The match was only about 4 minutes long, and Owen Hart, I'm a little disappointed, wasn't involved in something more noteworthy on this WrestleMania. Had a lot of good WrestleMania matches in the past, and unfortunately, his last WrestleMania too, he would pass away only a couple months after the show. Which really sucks. But for his last WrestleMania, he's in a random-ass tag team match with Jarrett and D'Lo Brown and Test. It was a very odd cast of characters, and Owen Hart and Jeff Jarrett came out victorious, still the tag team champions. Just a real throwaway match, but didn't really care about it whatsoever. A brawl-for-all match. The very controversial tournament finals here. Very interesting. I'll talk about this in a second. It's Butterbean versus Bart Gunn here, okay? The Brawl for All, if you're familiar with the contest, it was a tournament to determine the toughest man in WWE. It was a legitimate tough man contest. People were actually getting hurt, people were actually getting knocked out, and actually getting bloodied. It was pretty crazy. And when Bart Gunn won, it was seen as like, oh, the toughest guy in WWE is going to get a big push out of this, all this stuff. And then he had to go one-on-one with a professional boxer in Butterbean. So it was, and it was funny too. It was just comical watching this back, and I knew what was going to happen because I had heard people talk about this before. But this was my first time watching this matchup in its entirety. I mean, it's only 35 seconds long, but still, though, it was funny watching the video package that aired beforehand. They were getting interviews with all these schmucks. I don't know if they were trainers or wrestlers or whoever. I didn't recognize any of them. But they were all saying, a majority of them said, oh, I've got Bart Gunn here. You know, he's got the edge. He's got something that he's going to bring something to the table that Butterbean can't. It was comical because when the bell rang, Butterbean just dominated him. I don't want to use the word rape. I think that's a little strong, but he freaking dominated Bart Gunn here. You know, knocking him on the chin, I think right over the head at one point. He got back up, and then only a few seconds later did Butterbean just fucking knock this guy out, just clocked him. Knocked his lights out, getting the victory. The match was over in 35 seconds. A really embarrassing loss for Bart Gunn, and not too surprising that he was not in WWF for a much longer time after this show. He was not in WWE for much longer following WrestleMania 15, so not very surprising whatsoever after this very embarrassing loss. So yeah, the Brawl for All shit was one of the stupidest things that WWE ever did. It's not very smart for them. to ever really kind of mix reality with storyline and incorporate legit fighting and stuff like that. That's what UFC is for. Keep that stuff over there. Stick to the wrestling. Skip to the scripted shit. That's what you're known for. That's what you're good at sometimes. But yeah, this shit was terrible. Butterbean, it was comical. I mean, after he won, I rewinded this like 5 times. Seeing Bart Gunn go down for the count was like hysterical, and the guy was so out of it after the matchup ended. But Butterbean was celebrating like, yeah, I dominated him. He was going crazy. But yeah, it was unintentionally funny. This matchup was, so you can watch it for that reason. But a very embarrassing loss for not only Bart Gunn but WWE on the whole, proving that this whole brawl for all shit was a complete waste of time. Up next, Mankind versus Paul White, later known as The Big Show, to determine the special guest referee for the main event between Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock in the WWE title match later on that night. The match itself was nothing special. Anything involving Big Show I will probably never enjoy. He has his moments, but even back in '99 when he was in his quote-unquote prime, he was not good either. I mean, he's an attraction, but as a wrestler, I could really care less. This matchup was not really that good. And it ended with Paul White getting disqualified, too. I mean, he would turn on Mr. McMahon afterwards. And the big story of the night, alongside the whole corporation stuff and the McMahon-Helmsley regime and Degeneration Act, which was a strong story told throughout the night, which I'll get to in a couple minutes. But the big thing about this matchup was that... where was I even going with this? Where was it with this matchup? Where the fuck even? Oh, who was going to end up the special guest referee for the main event? The big thing with this matchup was whether Big Show is going to be aligned with Mr. McMahon and who is going to go on to main event or referee the main event of WrestleMania. And Mankind got attacked by Paul White afterwards. So he went to the hospital and Big Show got pissed off. So he knocked out McMahon. All this craziness. But yeah, one of the best stories of the night, aside from the whole Degeneration X thing, which I'll get to in a minute, and I'll make light of that in just a second, was how the whole, who's going to be the referee for the main event? We have no idea. Mankind's gone. Big Show got arrested. All this stuff. So that was a nice continuous story. I mean, it's not going to hook the viewer. I mean, they already bought WrestleMania. It's not like they're going to tune back in or something like an episode of Raw. But it was a nice narrative to tell for the night. Even though I didn't really care for the matchup itself, it was a nice kind of cliffhanger to go into the main event with. So I enjoyed that part of it. Up next, a 4 corners elimination match for the Intercontinental Championship. On paper, this seems like the most random match ever. The defending champion Road Dogg taking on Ken Shamrock, Goldust, and Val Venus. Thankfully, though, unintentionally, kind of intentionally, but I watched the St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view on the network from '99, the February pay-per-view from before this show. So it kind of made sense of a lot of the stuff that happened on this WrestleMania, because I got to see the build-up going into it, which I never ever do, with the exception, of course, the recent WrestleManias that I've actually seen. But for the older WrestleManias, I have no idea what's going on before them, what's going on after them. I just watched the WrestleManias. But so I got a nice little build-up going into this contest going on with the heat between Ken Shamrock and Val Venus, and Val Venus kind of banging his sister, Ken Shamrock's sister, Ryan Shamrock, who was a sight to see at ringside, and she was associated with Goldust. All this craziness, and in the end, Road Dogg was the one who had nothing to do with this entire storyline. He was the one defending his Intercontinental Championship. So the match itself was not like a great wrestling match, but the story was more so about Ryan Shamrock and how she would come to the aid of Goldust, who she was kind of hypnotized by, and ultimately, in the end, she would turn on Goldust, and the Blue Meanie was there too. He was under the trance of Goldust. All this confusion, but yeah, the match was nothing to write home about. But Road Dogg ended up coming out victorious, still the Intercontinental Champion. So there was that. But I did enjoy the story that was being told with Ryan Shamrock and that whole, thing. There was a big clusterfuck on the whole. It was a big clusterfuck. But at least I knew what was kind of going on before the match. But if you watch this WrestleMania and you have no idea what was going on at the time, if you didn't watch St. Valentine's Day Massacre, I watched it on Valentine's Day. That's the only reason why I watched it, in light of it being Valentine's Day. But, aside from that, if you didn't watch that pay-per-view, if you didn't watch WWE back in the late 90s, and you have really no idea what's going on going into the show, then you will probably not like this match as much as I did. I didn't even like this matchup. I just kind of enjoyed it more than some people would had they not seen the build-up, because I was kind of familiar with what was going on. I made sense of it, and it wasn't completely random, so it made sense from that point of view. But aside from that, this was kind of like your typical IC title match, and it really didn't... The eliminations didn't pack a punch. It was not a great, well-wrestled matchup. Pretty much was what it was. Up next, Kane taking on Triple H, and this is really where it all kind of ties in here. China had turned on Triple H shortly before WrestleMania, I think about a month or so in, where she had left D-Generation X and seemingly joined the corporation. So she came down halfway during this matchup to accompany Kane. The match itself between Kane and Triple H was okay. Triple H and Kane have never had the best of matches. I mean, it was solid. It wasn't great, though. Again, it was more about the story being told that kind of piqued my interest more than the matchup did. So Chyna came to the aid of Kane only in the end to get him disqualified. She would hit Kane over the head with a steel chair and reunite with Triple H and seemingly rejoin D-Generation X. And we'll get back to that in a minute because it's really, really interesting as in terms of what happened and what went down, and that's why this WrestleMania was kind of noteworthy in that sense. But, yeah, the match itself was really nothing to write home about, but the angle was really well done with Chyna reuniting with Triple H, and why would she turn on him in the first place? That didn't really make much sense, and they didn't really talk about it on this show. Maybe they did the next night. But why would they break up in the first place if they were going to ultimately reunite? But the way it came off and the way the people reacted, they loved it. D-Generation X is back together for a few moments eventually, and I'll get to the why in just a second. But yeah, that was a cool angle. Didn't really care for the match. It was fine for what it was. It was solid, but yeah, it wasn't a great match or anything. Sable defending her women's championship against Tori. Your typical women's match, even back in '99, it was basically what you would think it would be. It wasn't a bad match, but Sable was never the greatest wrestler. Like, I liked her involvement in the mixed tag team match from the year prior because it was limited. So, like, she was obviously the most over star in the entire contest, but the reason why I liked that matchup was because she was kept limited by the other people in the ring. Luna, Goldust, Mark Mero, and all the others. Still, though, she was very much over by this matchup, too. And it was a fine women's match, but it wasn't really anything out of the ordinary. Tori ended up getting powerbombed a few times, and Sable won. The crowd wasn't sitting on the edge of their seats. They just wanted to see Sable more than anything else, more than the match itself. Served its purpose in getting the women on the show, but other than that, it was kind of a pointless matchup. So up next, for the European Championship, the only time that you'll ever see the European title defended so close to the main event, Shane McMahon defending against X-Pac. Now, once again, I don't remember much about the matchup. Shane McMahon was always a great athlete, so I'm sure it was a nice matchup. And from what I remember, it wasn't a bad match. If it was terrible, it would stick out in my mind. If it was a great match, it would stick out in my mind. It's usually the middle-of-the-road stuff that I don't remember much because, you know, we see so much of it nowadays. And, you know, if it was good enough or bad enough to leave an impact, I would remember more about it. I just don't remember much about this matchup aside from the finish, which I'll get to now. So, a decent match while it lasted, but then we get to the finish with D-Generation X coming to the aid of X-Pac, only for it to be revealed that they are coming to the aid of Shane McMahon. They helped Shane McMahon pick up the victory. Triple H turned on X-Pac in the biggest swerve of the night, and this came after, of course, Chyna and Triple H had reunited, so it's a big moment. And then after that happens, they turn on X-Pac. The New Age Outlaws come down and say, "What you're doing?" And like, "What are you guys doing?" And then they turn on Triple H, and Triple H ended up brawling with them. So this pretty much solidifies the split of D-Generation X, and it's in original form anyway, with the exception of Shawn Michaels, with Triple H, X-Pac, New Age Outlaws, and Chyna. So Triple H and Chyna, even though they were on bad terms coming into the show, they would eventually reunite on this WrestleMania, only to split away from the rest of D-Generation X, which kind of faded off into obscurity for the rest of '99, while they joined up with the McMahons, Shane, Vince, and the rest of the corporation, Test, whoever. So the match itself wasn't anything noteworthy, but the post-match stuff was, solidifying the official split of D-Generation X. And like I said, DX would stick around for the rest of the year with Kane and X-Pac and the New Age Outlaws, and I think they would end up reuniting with Chyna and Triple H as heels at some point. But yeah, the moment itself was a nice shocker because I had no idea that was going to happen. I wasn't familiar with that angle. But the execution was really good, and that was like the big story of the night with D-Generation X getting back together only to break back up again, so that was pretty cool. Match itself was decent, but watch for the post-match stuff. It's pretty well done. We get to the second main event here before the actual main event. The Undertaker taking on Big Boss Man in a Hell in a Cell matchup. Easily the worst Hell in a Cell matchup I've ever seen. It's not really that surprising either. It wasn't like a disgusting matchup where it was like, it's not as bad as seeing Big Show or Kane in the main event of Raw in 2015. Nothing is ever going to be that bad. But in terms of your typical Hell in a Cell matchup, so forgettable and so bad. These two did not have any chemistry. And the Big Boss Man was like the lackey for the corporation. And this was kind of around the time I think it was at this WrestleMania where they acknowledged he was undefeated. So to think that Big Boss Man of all people was going to be the one to take out The Undertaker was, asinine. But the match itself really lacked a lot of star power, lacked a lot of excitement. it was a Hell in a Cell match, and you would think it would mean more. They just wanted to get this match on the show to give both guys something to do, and they said, to fuck with it, we'll just add the stipulation of it being a Hell in a Cell matchup, just kind of add more to it, make it mean something, but it didn't. The matchup kind of sucked, and the post-match stuff was what really bothered me with with Big Bossman being hung by the rest of the Ministry of Darkness. That was a little dark, especially considering Big Bossman ended up dying a couple years later. Not via suicide, at least I don't think, but the way it was handled, it was not a good visual, and I know that's what the Attitude Era was known for, so I'm not going to complain about it, and that, that kind of stuff was par for the course, but even for the Attitude Era, I felt like they were kind of pushing it a little bit. Stuff with like the Stone Cold and Brian Pillman, like the gun thing, like that was controversial, and they never did anything like that again. And I can't remember anything like this happening again in WWE. And someone pointed out to me on Twitter after I mentioned my disgust for the angle. I was talking about it on Twitter when I was watching it, and someone pointed out that, ECW did it all the time, so why does it matter in WWE? Yeah, ECW did that kind of shit too, but ECW is a lot different. I didn't agree with it when ECW did it, when they did the Christianing of what was it, Kurt Angle or the Sandman or something? It was something weird. I remember reading about it in the Rise and Fall of ECW book. But, I just didn't like the post-match angle. The match itself sucks, so all around I hated this part of the show, probably the worst part of the show for me. And it really does speak volumes, because WWE put out a 3-disc set, which I do own, the best Hell in a Cell matches ever, and it came out around, I think it was 2008, so the last match featured on there was Undertaker versus Batista from Survivor Series 2007, and it was, like I said, the best of Hell in a Cell, even though every single Hell in a Cell matchup was on there, and rightfully so, they're all amazing matches. The only exception, this matchup. They even threw in the random-ass Hell in a Cell matches from Raw, from like 97, with Kane, Mankind, Taker, and Stone Cold. Yet they didn't include this matchup, and it's not really surprising why. The matchup wasn't good, and they probably didn't want to make light of what happened afterwards with the whole hanging situation, so I don't blame them, but it really does speak volumes, seeing how this was the only matchup excluded from the best of Hell in a Cell, seeing how every other Hell in a Cell matchup was on that DVD up to that point, with the exception of this one, so, like I said, speaks volumes. But we get to the main event, Stone Cold Steve Austin contending for the WWF Championship against The Rock. A great main event. What else can I say? It's Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. Had an excellent matchup. It was more about gimmicky stuff and going outside the ring, and it was no disqualification. And I believe they added the stipulation like right before the pay-per-view, much like on WrestleMania 17 too. When they added the stipulation really like right before the show began on Heat or something like that, and they made the most of it. They brawled all around the arena. The in-ring action was really, really good, and the interference with like Mankind and everything else going on, did it bog down the match? Kind of, but I think, to me anyway, this is all personal opinion. This entire review is personal opinion. I think it added to it. I think it added an element of suspense and excitement, and anything can happen. Usually I'm not a fan of interference in the WrestleMania main event. I mean, we got it fucking last year, WrestleMania 30, but if it's done in a way where if it's done well, I don't have a problem with it. It was done well on this show with McMahon and Mankind and Rock and Austin. The whole thing was very well done, and it led to Stone Cold Steve Austin picking up his second WWE Championship win at WrestleMania. So I thought this was a great matchup, and I don't know if I would call it the best WrestleMania main event up to WrestleMania 15. I mean, we're talking about Hogan and Warrior here, Hogan and Savage, and there weren't many great... I mean, there were also, of course, the Iron Man match, too. But if this is not the greatest WrestleMania main event up to this point, it's definitely up there. The moment with Stone Cold winning the championship was great. The match itself, I thought, was very entertaining and easily the saving grace of this show. And when someone said to me recently that WrestleMania 15 was terrible, I don't disagree with that person now after watching this show. This was not a good WrestleMania. Like I said before, the only match worth watching from this show, go out of your way to see it. The main event between Stone Cold and The Rock. Everything else is well worth skipping over. The undercard was... I mean, I enjoyed the stories told. I enjoyed the matches between Shane. I enjoyed the DX stuff. I enjoyed the corporation stuff. But the rest of the stuff I didn't really care for. I only enjoyed the main event. I enjoyed the stories told, like I said before. But if you're only going to watch one match from each WrestleMania, watch the main event between Stone Cold and Rock. Amazing stuff. So that's going to do it for my review of WrestleMania 15. As always, guys, thanks for watching and listening. Really do appreciate it. I'll be back on Saturday with my review of WrestleMania 16, WrestleMania 2000, another not-so-great event, but I'll talk about why when I review it on Saturday. But in the meantime, in a between time, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant. Make sure to follow me there. Find me on Facebook at Graham Jason Matthews. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. I'll catch you guys on Saturday with my review of WrestleMania 2000. Thanks again, guys, and have a great weekend.